Welcome to the third module of this course on the principles and concepts of water integrity. My name is Justine Haag. I'm working with Water Integrity Network, an organization based in Berlin, Germany, and focusing its efforts on combating corruption in water worldwide. This module will focus on laws, institutions, and instruments supporting water integrity and anti-corruption at all levels. This module will follow a simple outline. In a first step, the main terms used in the material will be defined. Then, an overview of the most important frameworks supporting anti-corruption will be given. Finally, the main categories of actors engaged in anti-corruption space will be presented, highlighting their roles. A law is a system of rules applied by a special country or community. It regulates the action of its members and is enforced by imposition of penalties. Laws come in all shapes and colors and constitute frameworks that can be relatively complex. In this module, we will consider institutions such as NGOs, donor agencies, and ministries. As a reminder, weak institutions are environments in which corruption can thrive, which can, for example, lead to a weak separation of the public and private spheres, a culture of impunity, and weak systems of oversight. Please take a minute to look at these definitions before going to a practical example on the next slide. The African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child is a law. It was adopted in 1990 and entered into force in 1999. In 2000, it had 20 ratifications. The Charter defines a list of rights which are legal instruments and establishes a committee of experts which is an institutional instrument. The committee promotes and monitors the implementation of the Charter by following the reporting and complaints procedure, which is a mechanism. Laws are essential tools. Legally, they define what is a crime, who is responsible to find and punish the culprits. The lack of clear rules in the governance of a public sector generates loopholes in the system and leads to increased integrity risks. On the other hand, specific anti-corruption laws allow to foster integrity in society. The law provides for rights and duties. Corruption affects the rule of law negatively. Duty bearers may not be held accountable for their actions or their inaction. When corruption has such a dramatic impact on people and the environment in which they live, reforms including integrity and anti-corruption in the legal framework are required. Agreements can be binding or non-binding. In this module, we will mainly focus on binding agreements since they imply an accountability mechanism. Non-binding agreements are useful and may provide guidance to start a reform process. Why are there so many different types of legal instruments addressing integrity issues? Corruption is by nature a diffuse and dynamic phenomenon, and since there is no one-size-fits-all solution, a combination of tools will be required. Instruments can facilitate cooperation, kickstart a reform, allow to measure progress and compare performance. But legal instruments can also empower right holders to demand increased transparency, accountability, and participation. International instruments can support advocacy work and typically cover different types of anti-corruption measures: prevention and punishment, cooperation and asset recovery, technical assistance, and implementation review. You are certainly familiar with SDG 6, which addresses access to water, but water integrity requires to focus on SDG 16. SDG 16 specifically addresses anti-corruption and good governance through its 5 anti-corruption targets: 16.4 on illicit financial flows, 16.5 on corruption and bribery, 16.6 on the performance of institutions, 16.7 on participation, and 16.10 on access to information. For this, we have over 20 indicators to monitor the progress towards the realization of SDG 16. The most important international instrument for our topic is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. The UNCAC was signed by more than 140 states upon its adoption in 2005 and represents the universal standard in anti-corruption. The UNCAC does not define corruption but specific acts of corruption such as bribery or money laundering. It has an implementation mechanism including a national review process. Country reports include recommendations that are an excellent entry point for anti-corruption reforms and are available on the web. Other conventions also focus on the global anti-corruption space. Some of them are listed on the current slide. Several regional tools are also available. Please take a minute to go through this list and see which instruments apply to your region. As a matter of fact, groundwork for anti-corruption happens at national level and generally requires the definition of adequate instruments. To name a few examples, South Africa has a national anti-corruption strategy. Specific water sector anti-corruption strategies also exist in Mozambique, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, and the Philippines. Institutions are driving reforms, supported by the instruments they have developed to do so. Reforms are change processes that generally require to increase accountability, either through horizontal, vertical, or combined accountability strategies. Various institutions are actively involved in the field of water integrity. The UN provides policy and program support to water-related issues under SDG 6 and on anti-corruption under SDG 16. The UN is also the custodian of various declarations and conventions, such as the UNCAC. Governments implement development programs and legislative reforms on anti-corruption and implement preventive and punitive measures. Donors provide technical and financial assistance, which also can entail anti-corruption efforts in line with the Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness. The civil society provides checks and balances on the governments and private sector and promotes a culture of transparency and accountability in society. The media raises awareness, conducts investigative journalism, exerts pressure for political commitment for water integrity and against corruption. The private sector promotes business integrity, which includes fair competition and a zero tolerance towards corruption. The academia provides education and high-quality research on development issues, which can ultimately improve anti-corruption initiatives. Institutional accountability is also known as horizontal accountability. Anti-corruption agencies require to be politically, financially, and legally independent from the government. They perform their duty impartially. Ombudsmen make agencies accountable to the population, while auditors ensure public expenditure is managed properly. As a last resort, the judiciary applies its power and can punish corrupt practices. Beyond state institutions, non-state actors allow vertical accountability. Independent media and NGOs have an important role to play in the anti-corruption space, and their role should not be underestimated. Generally, an approach combining both vertical and horizontal accountability strategies is recommended to ensure integrity. Thanks a lot for your attention. I'm looking forward to hear from you on the forum, and I wish you all the best for the quiz and the following modules.